I have to start with the comments specifically about Google, because those came from testimony on the Hill by General Dunford last week, the chair of the Joint Chiefs, who specifically said the work that Google is doing in China is indirectly benefiting the Chinese military, and then went on to explain that statement. When it comes to industry partners for the U.S., is the military right to be calling out some of these companies for their work in a place like China?
Sure. I mean, I think the challenge of this discussion is that in the Pentagon, people tend to think of China as a strategic threat. And in Silicon Valley, people's primary thought is that it's kind of a business opportunity. And I think really it's a blend of those two things. It's possible that those two things are simultaneously true. And I think the tech community could certainly do a better job recognizing the threat that they pose.
I think it sort of gets at what seems to be a growing schism between some tech companies, especially the largest of the tech companies, and Silicon Valley more broadly, and the U.S. government, the military. How do you remedy that? Because the history is really intertwined between these two entities, and to see such kind of opposing viewpoints right now, really an area of controversy.
Yeah, the public belief is that somehow the entirety of Silicon Valley is against working with the U.S. government or the military in particular, and I think that's not true. I would actually argue that the vast majority of people in Silicon Valley would love to work on this important mission. The challenge kind of boils down to a very vocal minority that's doing everything they can to make it semantically unpalatable to do that work. So I think there's cultural parts on the industry side that need to be corrected. And on the government side, I think it's just a reframing of how we think about bringing innovative new companies into the department.
How do you do that?
Wow. How much time do we have? That seems like a huge problem. You know, we tend to have this kind of non-concentrated investment strategy, what I would call spray and pray investing, where if we have like a hypothetical $100 million innovation budget, our strategy is to write $400,000, $250,000 checks. Whereas a country like China has a very different strategy. They have that same hypothetical $100 million budget. They write $25 million checks. And I think the outcomes that you get from those two different approaches are wildly different. One framing that I think most people don't understand, or at least know about, is that the only two multi-billion-dollar venture-backed companies in the last 30 years, since the end of the Cold War, that are focused on defense are Palantir and SpaceX. That's it. Those are the only two examples. And at its core, this is really about the lack of concentration in the way that the Pentagon thinks about working with new entrants to the market.
Hey, Trae, I know Navarro has this piece in the Times today about national security being economic security. But here we are looking at ramping up production of tanks, even as the president talks about reining in military exposure to Syria, reining in military exposure to Afghanistan. What is the policy?
You know, I think that there's a big difference between the way we talk about military expenditures on technology and kind of where some of the core problems are. The proposed budget for 2020 is something like $750 billion, and there's a lot of people, including Secretary Esper. I know, Morgan, you had an interview with him a few days ago or last week, in which he said that getting AI right is critical, but we're only spending $1 billion in the proposed budget on AI, which is, 1/750th of the total budget. And so there's a big difference between resource-intensive, materials-intensive projects like aircraft carriers and tanks, and software, which is just fundamentally a different skill set.